Morning all, Brian S. Pratt here. I'm going to read chapter 8 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 of the Morcyth Saga. Now, one thing, I have started Buy Me a Coffee. Basically, it's where people can donate like to YouTubers or bloggers to help them out financially, things like that. I did it because my family's driving me crazy. See, I want to do these chapter reads, and they're afraid. Well, like Fires of Prophecy, it's not free online. People got to buy it now. We get royalties, and they said if you do put this on free online, you're not going to get royalties. Your income's going to go down. So I've done this. So those who don't buy my books but want to listen to them can still support me in that way. Anyone else who wants to too is fine, obviously. But and we'll see how it goes. The first 5 days I started book 2, I had no book 2 downloads at Amazon Kindle. But lately it's been picking up, so maybe it was just a lull. We'll see. I never get that many sales anyway. I used to get a lot, but I don't get much anymore. So hopefully this will help. Anyway, chapter 8 of Fires of Prophecy. James has realized that he left his backpack back at Mountainside, where they got captured and then fled from the cells. Well, his backpack and stuff was still there. So Jerome has gone back by himself to either retrieve it or destroy it, because James is worried about the notes inside that would tell anyone that he's a mage, and he's afraid that would cause them to come after them even more. So he's riding back. So chapter 8. Jerome left them quickly behind as he raced through the cool night. As frustrated as he was at James for having to go back and retrieve his stupid backpack, he found it refreshing to be out on his own. Making very good time, it wasn't long before the lights of Arakan appeared on the road ahead. Remembering the soldiers stationed there, he swung wide to avoid being spotted. As he rounded the town, he spied one of the townsfolk standing outside the outermost building, his form silhouetted by the light coming through an open doorway. The man must have heard the approach of his horse, for he turned in his direction and peered intently, but was unable to pierce the darkness. Sensing no threat, the man returned to what he had been doing. Jerome finished bypassing the town, then returned to the road, soon leaving Arakan far behind. Continuing to race north, another hour found him at the quiet village of Bindles. Only a few lights could be seen amongst the buildings. The rest were dark as the inhabitants slept. He swung wide around the town and reached the juncture of roads on the far side. There he followed the road eastward. The mountains now loomed large on his left as he raced down the road. In the air was the faint odor of burnt wood, testament to the forest fire they had escaped from some time earlier. Once east of Bindles, he dismounted and walked for a while, giving his horse a break. 10 minutes later, he was back in the saddle and riding hard. I really have no clue as to the best method of doing riding horses. I know you alternate riding hard with walking so as to save their strength and such, but how much and what ratio, I don't know. But I do what I can. As he continued north, the odor of smoke became stronger and stronger. After another 2 hours, he saw a glow coming from far ahead, where the fire still raged upon the mountainside. As he rode, the glow became more and more pronounced until individual flames could be discerned arcing into the sky. Off to the east, the sky lightened with the coming dawn, enabling him to see an incredibly large smoke cloud extending for miles in every direction. Down the road, his destination came into view amidst the smoke. The fire was within a mile of the outskirts and at first looked to be deserted. As he came closer, he saw that it wasn't as deserted as it had first appeared. A few people passed from building to building with cloths tied about their face to protect them from the smoke. Realizing an opportunity when he saw it, Jerome pulled up to one of the houses at the outskirts of town. He tied his horse to a tree out back before going to the back door. Finding it locked, he moved to a window and peered inside. The place looked deserted. Returning to the door, he glanced around quickly to make sure no one was near and kicked it open. Entering quickly, he shut the door behind him. The house was quiet, the people most likely having fled the approaching fire. He found a cloth and tied it around his face, effectively disguising himself. Coming back to where his horse was tied, he remounted and searched for the jail. He passed several people as he made his way through town, but no one gave him a second thought. Up near the fire, dozens of people tried to halt the advancing flames with axes and shovels. Just as the group had a space cleared in the hopes of preventing it from spreading, a flaming tree would fall across the cleared area, starting new fires beyond the fire break. People rushed to beat them out before they had a chance to spread, but were having limited success. None of the firefighters looked to be soldiers, though from this distance and with all the smoke it was hard to be sure. As he continued toward the jail, he didn't come across any soldiers in town either. Guess we got them all, up on the mountain, he mused. Out of the smoke ahead, the jail came into view. Cautiously, he slowed as he took a good survey of the surrounding area. Finding it clear, he made his way toward the jail, all the while continuously scanning for anyone approaching. But with the density of smoke, they would have to be quite close before they would even know he was there. At the jail, he secured his horse to the rail outside and went to peer in a window. The jail looked empty, a lucky break. Off to one side of the main room, a table had been overturned, most likely during their jailbreak. Spilled on the floor beside it was James's backpack, along with their knives and other belongings. Surprised and pleased to see that it all remained and had remained untouched, he made sure he was unobserved and then entered. Hurrying to where his knives laid on the floor, he picked them up first and belted them on. He felt better now that he had them again. Stuffing Tunuk's knives into the backpack, he slung it over his shoulder and proceeded back to the front door. The sound of approaching horses stopped him before opening the door. I didn't like that. Okay. Come on. Yes. Sorry if I'm jiggling you. My S key. Okay, the sound of approaching horses caused him to pause. That sounds better. Moving to a window, he looked out and discovered a score of enemy soldiers approaching on horseback. He watched them for a few seconds, and when he realized the jail was their destination, ran to the cells in the back and slipped out through the hole in the wall James had made during their escape. By the time he reached the alley behind the jail, the sound of soldiers talking could be heard from where they stopped out front. What they said was unknown, as Jerome didn't speak the Empire's language. He slipped around the back to the side alley and moved to the end where he could peer around the corner to observe the riders out front. The majority still sat upon their horses. One lone horse stood without a rider. Jerome's horse sat in the middle of the group, and it didn't appear as if anyone paid it much attention. Shortly, a soldier's voice called to the others from within the jail. The one whose attire marked him an officer barked out orders, and half the remaining men dismounted, as did he. The others turned and proceeded to move quickly in different directions throughout the town. Then he heard another soldier's voice from inside shout excitedly as he found the hole in the cell. Jerome looked longingly at his horse sitting there amidst the others for a moment, then hurried back to the alley behind the jail. When he reached it, he turned to follow it away from the jail. Just as he reached the end of the alley, he paused a moment and glanced back. A soldier stuck his head out of the hole in the wall, looking first one way, then the other. He quickly slipped around the corner to avoid being seen. Not hearing an outcry, Jerome breathed a sigh of relief. He continued down the side alley until reaching a door. Finding it unlocked, he slipped inside and closed it behind him. This looked to be another residence. The room had 2 tables, 4 chairs, and 1 long couch. He moved to a window and kept a lookout on what the soldiers were doing. They appeared to be searching for something, maybe he and the others. The riders combed the streets while the officers stayed within the jail with several others. He hoped they would leave so he could retrieve his horse. He would never make it back to the others without it. The entrance to the jail was barely discernible through the thick smoke enveloping the town. He saw the officer emerge amidst the haze, upset and angry. He barked out more orders, and several of his men mounted and raced off to the south. The officer stood there a moment as he looked at the fire and the people trying to halt its course. Now, who were the soldiers? They just happened by, and when he went in there, he found the dead soldiers that Jerome and Tunnock had taken out during their escape, a hole in the wall, so he knew something happened. And he's upset because soldiers were killed, and he's got to find out who did it. The entrance to the jail was barely discernible through the smoke enveloping the town. He saw the officer emerge amidst the haze, upset and angry. Jerome continued to watch as two of his men appeared out of the smoke with a man held between them. They brought him to the leader and forced him to his knees. The officer asked the man in the northern tongue, Where are the men that were stationed here?" The man on his knees just shook his head. The officer signaled, and one of the men twisted an arm behind the man's back, making him cry out. "I said, where are my men?" "I don't know," the man cried out. "Something happened here," the officer said, and then came forward. Grabbing the man's hair, he yanked his head back and stared into his eyes. "What?" Gasping through the pain in his arm, the man exclaimed, "I don't know. They brought some people in and had them in the jail." "Who were they?" the officer snapped. "We never found out," the man cried. The officer let go of the man's hair and then nodded to his man, who released his grip on the arm. "Then what?" Holding his arm tightly across his chest, the man kept his head down while he answered. Jaren had to really strain to hear what was being said. Then that night, we heard shouting and fighting, and when it was calm again, there was a hole in the jail, and several of the soldiers were dead. "How could people in cells have caused all that?" He looked intently at the man. When the officer paused for an answer, the man looked up but just shook his head. The officer continued. "Did the townsfolk help them?" "Oh no," the man cried. "We did not. We didn't realize they had anyone there until after it was over." He looked to the officer, hoping to be believed. "Then what?" "Your men gave chase as the prisoners fled up the mountains," the man replied, bowing his head once more. "Some time later, the soldiers returned, several of them having been killed, I heard. The next morning, the officer in charge took the whole garrison after them, but none came back. Shortly after that, the fire swept down the mountainside, almost like magic." "Magic, you say?" the officer asked intently. The man looked up at the officer and nodded. "It seemed like it, as fast as that fire spread." The officer mumbled, as he thought quietly. "Let him go," he said to his men, who then released the man. To the man he said, "If you and your folk had a hand in the killing of my men, I will cut the throat of every man, woman, and child and raze this town to the ground." Fear in his eyes, the man exclaimed, "We didn't." "We'll see," and then waved his hand, dismissing him. The man turned and fled down the street as fast as his legs could carry him, never once looking back. The officer and his men conferred for a moment and then returned inside his jail. "Damn," Jerome quietly exclaimed. "Why did he have to say magic? Hopefully they won't put, as James said, 2 and 2 together." He continued watching, but everything remained quiet. His horse remained tied at the post outside the jail, along with the others. Figuring on a wait before he would be able to reclaim his horse, he looked through the house and discovered bread and fruit in the kitchen. He pulled a chair close to the window so he could keep an eye on what was going on outside while he ate. Nothing of interest happened during the meal. Soldiers came and went from the jail, and the occasional townsman ran past carrying a shovel or some other item used to combat the fire. After he finished, he tried to figure out a way to retrieve his horse. The last 24 hours began to catch up with him, and he found himself yawning and rubbing his eyes. Deciding on a short nap, since he had to wait anyway, he climbed the stairs to the second floor and found a bedroom with a large bed. He placed the knapsack beside him on the bed as he lay down and then took one of his knives, keeping it in his hand in case of trouble. Closing his eyes, he quickly fell asleep. Voices from below woke him. He sat up abruptly and then made his way to the bedroom door to listen. He heard 2, maybe 3 people downstairs talking in the Empire's tongue. Soldiers, most likely. Returning to the bed, he grabbed the backpack and then silently made his way to the top of the stairs. Looking down, he saw a soldier with a partially filled sack, opening drawers and looking through them. Occasionally, he would take something out, eye it appraisingly, and then put it in his sack. Looting. The soldier said something to the others and then made his way to the stairs. Thinking fast, Jerome hurried back to the bedroom. flipped the coin on the bed, and then swung the door all the way into the room as he hid in the space behind it against the wall. Shielded behind the door, he listened to the soldier's footsteps as he came up the steps. His heart beat fast. Jerome heard the soldier coming down the hallway toward him. When the footsteps reached the open door, he heard the soldier pause and then gasp as he saw the silver coin sitting upon the bed. Jerome then heard him enter the room, hurrying to collect the coin. As the soldier reached the bed, Jerome silently came out from behind the door with both knives drawn. Catching the soldier by surprise, he was able to quickly take him out with minimal noise. Easing the body of the dead soldier onto the bed, he took back his coin and then returned to the hallway, shutting the door behind him. Moving to the top of the stairs, he listened as the other two continued rummaging around below. One of them raised his voice and then paused. He spoke louder this time and again paused. The two down below whispered among themselves, and then Jerome heard them hurrying to the foot of the stairs. Jerome returned back toward the room with a dead soldier and entered a closet sitting across the hallway from the room. He closed the door just enough to leave a thin opening through which he could see. Through the crack, he observed the two soldiers coming down the hallway. They went from room to room as they hollered for their companion. When the game came to the one with their dead comrade, they rushed in. He heard them say something, and then a moment later, one exclaimed, and they hurried from the room. When the first one exited and was close enough, Jerome kicked the door open. Sorry, that's all. I got that. They kicked open the door to the closet, catching the soldier in the shoulder, causing him to stumble and fall. With both knives drawn, he advanced on the other soldier as the man exited the room. Having seen his friend knocked down, the soldier drew a sword and thrust at Jerome's midsection. Easily deflecting the blade with the knife, Jerome slashed with his other, scoring along the man's forearm. Keeping an eye on his opponent's downed companion, he pressed the man with a series of attacks which soon had him bleeding from several places. The soldier on the floor got back to his feet and advanced on Jerome with sword drawn, coming to his partner's aid. He thrust but failed to connect when Jerome twisted to avoid the incoming blade. As the blade went past, Jerome struck out and stabbed the man in his exposed armpit, puncturing a lung. The man went down, coughing and gagging. Seeing his partner fall, the remaining soldier retreated back into the room. He grabbed a chair and threw it through the window. As the window shattered, he ran to it and began hollering. He then turned and looked at Jerome with an evil smile and said something to him in his language. Realizing he was about to be inundated with soldiers, Jerome turned and raced to the stairs, hoping to escape the house before they got inside. When he reached the top, he heard the door downstairs slam open as soldiers rushed into the house. He turned and paused when the remaining soldier came out of the room, sword drawn and ready. Looking around, he saw a trapdoor in the ceiling down the hallway past the soldier. He threw the backpack at him, then quickly advanced with a flurry of attacks that soon had him lying down on the floor. Picking up the backpack, he raced to the trapdoor and pulled on the rope attached to it. He heard soldiers running up the stairs. The trapdoor came down and a stepladder unfolded, allowing access to the attic. As he climbed, he heard someone shout behind him. He turned and saw enemy soldiers running down the hallway toward him. When he reached the top, he tried to pull the ladder up, but one of the soldiers already had a grip. Already had a grip on the bottom rung, preventing him from retracting it. Next to the trapdoor sat a chest. Taking over, he pulled it over the trapdoor and dropped it on the soldiers below. He heard it crash down the stairs and into the men, followed shortly by curses and one cry of pain. Having only seconds, Jiren quickly glanced around, and the only exit was a small window on the far side of the attic. He quickly picked up several other things of moderate weight and threw them down in quick succession at the soldiers below before running to the window. The window was hinged and he swung it open. He looked down and saw a straight drop to the street below. Above him loomed the edge of the roof, a mere 2 meters above the window. Pulling himself to a sitting position on the sill, he grabbed the edge of the roof and pulled himself up. A crossbow bolt struck the eave next to where he climbed. Below, a dozen soldiers watched him, 2 armed with crossbows. Another thud, and he felt a bolt embed itself in the backpack. Finally gaining the roof, he rolled away from the edge and the deadly barrage coming from the streets below. The roof was shrouded by thick smoke. He pulled out the cloth again and wrapped it once more around his face, trying to keep the smoke out of his lungs. In a low crouch, he gained the center of the roof and quickly surveyed his options. A narrow alleyway separated this building from the one behind it. Keeping low, he ran and leapt across the gap to the other building, landing easily. Looking back, he saw a soldier gain the roof by way of the window in the attic. He saw Jerome and paused as he pointed, shouting to the soldiers in the streets below. Then he started running toward him as another began to climb up from the attic. Glancing across the roof to the other side, he saw that the buildings continued close together for a while. Having no other choice, he ran and jumped from rooftop to rooftop as he tried to find a way out of the situation. After jumping to the third building, he could feel the fire's heat and realized that it had reached the edge of town and had begun to consume the building at the end of the row he had been jumping across. Looking behind him, he saw several soldiers running and jumping from building to building toward him. With no other choice, he raced toward the end of the line of the buildings and the fire until he reached the last building yet to catch fire. He slung the backpack over his shoulder and turned to face the oncoming soldiers. The heat from the fire consuming the building behind him was almost intolerable as he waited their arrival. When the soldiers reached the building before his, they stopped and shouted. Unable to understand what was being said, he stood with knives ready, planning to sell his life dearly. A popping noise came behind him, caused him to turn and look. The building upon which he stood had caught fire, and the fire was creeping toward him. He stepped away from the flames, but the roof cracked under him and caved in. He fell to the floor below. Smoke and fire were everywhere. He hit the floor hard and came up quickly. He searched through the flames and smoke for a way out. Spying a doorway, he made his way toward it through the smoke. Even with the cloth around his face, the smoke affected him. He coughed and his eyes burned. Passing through the doorway, he found the hallway to his left was aflame, the heat nearly unbearable. A thought crossed his mind, something James had said before he left. Someone needed to go and retrieve it, or at least destroy it and the papers it carried, the backpack. He took and threw it into the flames, then watched for a brief moment to ensure it was being consumed and destroying the letters inside. Turning, he fled down the hallway from the flames to the stairs. The smoke billowed up them like a chimney. With no other choice, he raced down through the dense, hot smoke, barely able to see and coughing as his lungs tried to expel the smoke. At the bottom, the flames wreathed one end of the hallway, the heat causing his hair to curl and smolder. Unable to even see any longer, he turned and moved in the opposite direction, away from the flames. Putting the heat behind him, he kept one hand in contact with the wall as he moved blindly, searching for the way out. Suddenly, he felt cool air on his face and was able to breathe a little better. Running, he made it through the front door, where he collapsed on the ground, coughing and gasping. He heard a footstep beside him and looked up to see the officer with two men holding crossbows aimed at him. The officer said something in their language, and two of his men grabbed him and brought him to his feet as they carried him toward the jail. So that ends chapter 8. Jerome's captured because of James' stupid backpack, but it was destroyed, so all concerned about the letters inside. Of course, Tannock's knives were in there too, so they lost those, but knives can always be replaced. So we'll do chapter 9 tomorrow. I've taken a lot of grief over Jerome's race back to Mountainside to get the backpack over the years, but I like the scene, and it sets up for what comes later. Anyway, that's chapter 8. 9 will be tomorrow. Personal stuff. My company has left. The two best times when company visit is when they get there and when they leave. No, I love my brother and his wife. They're great, and I enjoyed their visit. But it's always nice to get back to your normal routine. Today, I'm going to the Choctaw Casino with Joseph, my boy. He bought a ticket to the Boswell Homecoming Rodeo, which is this Saturday. He doesn't plan to go, but with the $5 ticket, he gets a $20 free play at the Choctaw Casino in Durant. So we'll be there probably around 10 o'clock today. Then after that, we'll go to Walmart and have Wendy's on the way home. Yep, that's my big day. So chapter 9 tomorrow. I'll see you then. You take care.